Greetings, context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and justice, and to share constructive information on racism, what it is, and how it works. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for today's program. Hopefully, it will be very constructive. Before we get started, I did want to let everybody know Hakima, non-white person, victim of racism. She's doing her first program today, and it's actually very much related to what we're going to be discussing on this program. She's going to be talking about black people, non-white people in general, who use skin lighteners and those sorts of creams. Very devastating health consequences. She's been doing a lot of research prepping for this program. It's going off today at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Show will be archived. If you're unable to tune in live, please check her out. She's right here at Blog Talk Radio. Excellent program, debut effort. I'll be checking out the archives myself. And also definitely want to make sure that you check out Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer. She will have Mr. Josh Wickett, who has done a plethora of counter-racist film reviews, picking out racism and imagery in a lot of different films and books. He's also done quite a few book reviews on racism. Her show will be airing tomorrow. It will be at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Pacific. That's Counter-Racist Evolving Engineers. So make sure you support them. They've been very helpful for my efforts. I remember the first broadcast I did here at the Cows, Hakima was my only live listener. It was me and her hanging out in the chat room. That was a year ago, and we don't even do the chat room anymore. Today's guest, I'm very pleased to have her on the program. I found out about her checking a different blog on racism. And they showed a study that she conducted that was looking at the correlation between discrimination and depression amongst black females. And I found it was very interesting. Researched the study and saw that she had also written several books. The one that I picked out for this show, In and Out of Our Right Mind, The Mental Health of African American Women. Also chock full of constructive information, very much in line with the study that she did dealing with depression and black females. When I contacted our guest, she was a professor at Florida State University. Things have changed, got to keep up. Now she is a professor at Texas A&M, and she is the head of the Racial and Ethnic Studies Institute, unless I have been misinformed. Our guest for today's program, Dr. Verna Keith. Dr. Keith, are you with us?
I am with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, loud and clear.
Wow, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. It is the pleasure is ours. Always great to have informed folks come in and share a little knowledge with us so we can be more better equipped to deal with racism. Could you please share with our listeners a little information about yourself and the work that you do?
Well, I am a sociologist by training. I finished my PhD at University of Kentucky, and I won't tell you how long ago that was. And I've done some postdoctoral research at the University of Michigan. And I've lived in a couple of different places, as you noted. I was in Arizona for a number of years, then went to Florida, and now I am in Texas. I got interested in research on mental health when I was doing a postdoc in Michigan. They have a very large group there who is interested in various aspects of mental health, particularly among people of color. And then, it's a place that has a lot of energy, so people come in and go out. And I made the acquaintance of Dr. Diane Brown, who at that time was at Wayne State University. And we looked around and sort of found out that there was not a lot of research-based material out there about African American women in mental health. So we undertook a project in which we brought together scholars from various disciplines to write about this topic. And that's how In and Out of Our Right Minds was born. And in addition to that, I do scholarly articles on the topic. So that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Okay. Outstanding. I definitely want to dig into In and Out of Our Right Minds, as well as the study that was published in November of last year about depression and discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
Before we hop into both of those, this program, the C.O.W.S, Context of White Supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy, and the definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe such a system exists, and do you think that is an accurate definition?
Well, I think there is a system that exists, and it has dated back from probably the 15th century, when the whole notion of race was invented. I think it has become a little bit more complex in that a lot of racism is deliberate, as your definition implies, but some of it is what we would call systematic. That is, it's built into the system and has taken on a life of its own, and you don't have to have perpetrators necessarily, to be directly involved. And so we have a foundation that began all of those centuries ago, and it keeps churning without sort of individual agency, without individuals being involved in some cases. Now, there's plenty of dimensions in which there are people manipulating things and deliberately trying to control things, but there's also this other part which has just resulted from historical practices. And when you talk to sociologists, this is a large part of the kinds of things that they talk about. For example, I'll give you an example of this: residential segregation. Residential segregation began with sort of individual acts, but because it exists now, there are things that come from it that even if we got rid of all discrimination today, would still have a negative impact on people of color, because where you live determines where you go to school, and where you go to school determines the quality of education, and then quality of education determines what kind of job you have. So even if all the laws which sort of direct and banking practices and things like that, which direct people into certain areas, if that ceased today, we would still have racialized effects because this system was established a long time ago. So I would add to your definition of racism.
Okay. I do want to point out to folks who are listening into the program, most of the time we have white guests on the show to talk about racism, white supremacy. Some of them you actually quoted in your book here. Most of the white guests who have been on the program have agreed such a system does exist, and most of them have agreed that that definition is accurate. Just pointing that out for the listeners. One more thing: would you say it's accurate? You're a black female, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Would it be accurate to say you are a victim of racism?
Sure.
Okay.
On many different that was my only point that I was trying to get at with your definition, is that sometimes, and I say this because oftentimes you're having conversations with people who are not of color, and they have a very narrow definition of what racism is. And so in case some of those people are listening today, I just wanted to get that out, that it occurs on different levels. There's interpersonal things, and then there's sort of broader kinds of issues.
You said people not of color. You mean white people?
Yes, white people mostly, yeah. But
we do. I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I probably should have qualified that with people, because sometimes you're talking to people of color, and they have an understanding of racism that is also narrow sometimes. So
I would agree. I would agree wholeheartedly. And we do have quite a few white people listen to this program. It seems so. Yeah, I suspect some are listening live now. My co-host for the program, Justice, she is a non-white female. She is all of 10 years old, but she is also working to learn as much as she can about racism. And I think especially the information that you talk about would be very helpful, given what I read in your book about how early some of this stuff begins to impact black females. So she would like to ask some questions as well.
Okay.
If you are ready to roll, Justice, go right ahead with your questions.
What media would you recommend for kids to learn and understand white supremacy?
Well, what media? Well, I think one of the problems that we have is that people like me who work in universities often write about white supremacy, but we write it in a way that only we understand, because we're using words that we've developed, which may not have the same meaning to people who are not in our areas. So I think the closest thing, besides directing you to what we write about, and which often are things that, where we're talking to each other, I think some of the black columnists have been pretty good at pointing out contradictions in the system that are good examples of white supremacy, of challenging ideas that appear either in the print media or on television, and taking on some of those issues. So I would recommend that one of my favorite writers is Leonard Pitts. I think he's very good at writing about these issues and pointing to why they represent instances of white supremacy. And he writes for the Miami Herald. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. That'll be all. Great. And I'll probably just be asking just like 3 or 2 questions for this show.
Okay. Unfortunately, for people 10 years old, there's not a lot of, I don't think there's a lot of writing that's out there on that level. And that may be wrong. Maybe there are people who write in children's literature who can correct me on this, and I hope that they would call in if that's the case.
I too have noted the exact same thing that you said to Justice about how individuals who are in university settings, they do have a lot of information about racism, white supremacy, but when they talk about it and or write about it, oftentimes it's done in such a manner that regular old folks who maybe don't have a PhD can't easily grasp what's being said, and they miss out on a lot of that information. So that's a big thing I try to do on this program, is correct that, so that we're talking in a manner that everyday person who maybe hasn't been to college or university can understand this information, because I think it can be done. I think we've evidenced on this program it can be done, and you don't need a PhD to talk about racism accurately.
No, you don't. Now, you know why this exists, right? You know why they write that way. Because
why is that?
Because we're in institutions where the way that you stay in an institution is that you have to publish, and you have to publish in peer-reviewed journals and outlets. And so the tendency is to write in a way to convince the people who are going to be reviewing your work for and determining whether it's published or not. You want to convince them that you know what you're talking about, and so that tends to lead to jargon. And in some cases, even people within the general area may not understand the jargon in a particular sub-area. So it's not just a problem of. It's not just a matter of having a PhD. Sometimes it's a matter of being in that particular subgroup, and if you're not, you have to decipher. But I did want to point out, you reminded me of something that I did want to point out. There is one publication in sociology in particular, which is called Context. And Context often has articles in it that deal with racism, and they're written in a way that can be grasped by people who are not necessarily sociologists. So I did want to point out that's one place that you do see these issues discussed, and as well as other issues. But they are the journal itself was designed to be a way of getting these kinds of issues out to the general public.
Wow, okay. That's two I would look for. You said columnist Mr. Leonard Pitts.
Yeah.
And Context. I will.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's put out by the American Sociological Association.
Okay. I'm writing that down. Okay. That's two things we can check on after the program is over. Wow. Okay. And I thought that was a great point. I don't think anyone has come on the program yet and shared what you just did with our listeners about why oftentimes when people write about racism and white supremacy, they do so in a convoluted manner.
Yeah.
I actually had an admitted white supremacist who is a professor at the University of Washington. He actually said that is a conscious part of how white supremacy is maintained by speaking about it in such a manner that the victims can't really grasp what's being said, and they're missing out on information. It kind of feeds into making them feel inferior and like they can't really understand this, that something's wrong with you because you can't understand this. He was unwilling to come on the program and share this, but he did let me know this privately. And other people, I had suspected that all along, but other people have confirmed that. But I'm glad you shared that bit of information.
Well,
I think that's very...
now,
go right ahead.
there might indeed be some of that, but the people who write in this area in my discipline tend not to be trying to obscure things, but trying to reveal things. But they're under certain constraints because in order to be able to do this work, you have to meet certain requirements of the discipline, and there's a tension there. You know what I'm saying? You don't get rewarded for writing articles that get published widely in regular media outlets. You get rewarded in the university, and you get to keep your job by publishing in these journals. Yeah, and so that's part of it. It's not, and we've, as a discipline, and it's not just the people who write about racism. It's general. This is a general indictment of academia. Is that in many cases we haven't figured out a way to build in a reward system for taking the work that we do as scholars and then and disseminating it to the general public. We have not done a very good job of that.
I want to get into your work because I think that's real important. So this will be my last question on another topic. But the people who control the rewards and what information gets published in scholarly journals, by and large, do these tend to be white people?
Well, if you look at the number of PhDs in the United States, yeah, there's going to be more whites than there are people of color. But these general rules are, most of the time you're reviewing the articles of one another. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think there's a concerted effort to like squash certain kinds of information and let other information go through because people tend to know who's writing what, although it's blind review. They sort of have a general idea. And so I don't think there's very much of that where certain lines of thinking are deliberately, kept out of print. Now, having said that, there are these sort of general rules. There are these tensions that have been part of the discipline, such as, and they're breaking down somewhat. But in old days, when there used to be arguments about, well, if you submit an article that dealt with people of color, you had to have a white comparison group. And, yeah. But if you submitted an article about whites, you didn't, you could submit an article about whites. Well, that kind of thing has sort of broken down now. You don't have those kinds of debates as much as you did in the past. So that's what I would say about that.
Again, our guest for today's program, Texas A&M's Dr. Verna Keith. Dr. Keith, the research that I've been looking at in terms of depression and black females, you start off really at the very beginning of In and Out of Our Right Minds. You start off laying a foundation in defining what you mean when you say mental health. Can you share that foundation with our listeners about what you mean when you say mental health?
Well, mental health is a really broad concept, and so it encompasses a number of other concepts that, if we think of a continuum, if we think of a straight line, and we can think of, on the one end of that straight line, we have concepts such as life satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your life? How happy do you think you are? We tend to think of that as an indicator of mental health. So people who are highly satisfied with their lives and who think they're happy are determined to be sort of mentally healthy. And we can look at the other end of that continuum and think about people who are mentally ill. And mental illness is defined as meeting certain criteria that have been published by that are published in the what they call the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and depending on a cluster of symptoms, it yields conditions that we think of as mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorders. So when I say it's a continuum, I'm talking about the fact that we have various indicators of where you stand and how mentally healthy you are. And they range from these sort of general concepts like happiness and life satisfaction all the way to what are called diagnosable mental disorders that are generally treated by healthcare professionals. And what we tried to do in the book was to kind of capture that range of conditions.
Okay.
And you have to, if I'm not answering as detailed as you would like, just ask me another question.
Okay, I will do that. On page 24 of In and Out of Our Right Minds, it says, mental health for blacks must encompass feelings of self-worth within the total context of society as well as within one's identifiable subgroup. According to Wilcox, mental health is the foundation of survival in a racist society. Among blacks, mental health necessarily compromises an awareness and adaptation to an often racially hostile environment. Can you break that statement down for our listeners?
What we're trying to get at is that is trying to answer the question of what determines where you fall on that continuum that I just talked about. Some people, now I would argue that most African Americans in the United States have experienced racism because we live in the society that we live in. Some people handle it better than other people, okay? And mental health researchers, we not only want to know where you fall on the continuum, but we want to know what distinguishes the people who are able to withstand these experiences and not end up with some diagnosable disorder versus the ones who are not. There's variation in how people respond to living in this society. And there are key mechanisms that sort of identify who those folks are likely to be. For example, if you are a person who has experienced racism, particularly either a major event or just working in an environment where you're subjected to insults on a daily basis, one of the things that helps you deal with those circumstances is if you are able to maintain a healthy image of yourself. We call self-esteem. Now, think about being in a situation in which you're put down, you're hearing insults about your group, if not about yourself. You're constantly being asked questions about why do, black people commit more crimes. And that wears on you day after day after day. And so one of the things that research tells us is that people who are able to separate themselves and maintain a healthy view of themselves as individuals are less likely to become depressed, are less likely to feel anxiety in those situations, and particularly less likely to feel it in a way that makes them non-functional, where they actually do exhibit symptoms that are so severe that they have to be treated medically. And so what we were trying to get at in that statement was the notion that all African Americans, to a certain extent, and other people of color living in racist environments are subject to these insults, to things that happen to them on the basis of race. And the ones that come out of those experiences without major damage are usually people who are able to sustain a healthy view of themselves. And there are other mechanisms, there are other things that assist you in being able to maintain that healthy view of yourself. For example, in in African American culture anyway, religious beliefs and spirituality and church involvement are considered things that assist people in maintaining that healthy personal view of themselves, which helps them not succumb to the bombardment of racism.
Wow. Would you say in a system of racism, white supremacy, that for non-white people, their self-esteem, their sense of self-efficacy is under a constant attack? Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, it is under constant attack, but not everybody wavers under that attack. You know what I'm saying? On each of these things, there are degrees or continuums where people fall. And people who can maintain, if you're able to withstand it and maintain a healthy self-esteem, if you're able to maintain a sense of self-efficacy, you're less likely to become depressed. You're less likely to turn to drugs, and all the whole list of what we call mental disorders.
Okay. And I just want to make sure.
That is very difficult to do.
Yes, ma'am. I know all about that. Yes, ma'am. I suspect a lot of our non-white listeners do too. I just wanted to highlight for folks listening in when we say self-efficacy, meaning that you have the ability to control things that are happening to you, that are happening in your environment. Would that be an accurate definition for self-efficacy?
Yes. At least you believe you do. You know.
Okay.
You believe, and the people who believe this tend to then engage in certain actions that it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you can do something about a situation, then you tend to look for ways to ameliorate whatever that situation is. And those are the people who tend to be the healthiest, who are less likely either to become physically ill or mentally ill. And I say it is a belief because we distinguish between believing it and doing things, although they're connected. And and that works, with a lot of, not only just the stress that comes from racism, but with a lot of other stressors, And usually the stress of racism is combined with a lot of different stressors, including financial problems. Which is,
wow.
So if you think about a person who, in a job where they're exposed to a lot of racism, they're exposed to a lot of financial pressure because they can't quit the job where they're being discriminated against. And you think about the circumstances of trying to maintain a sense of efficacy when you feel trapped in a situation. You can understand why that would wear on your physical health and wear on your mental health.
Wow.
And this is why we have a very strong relationship between social class and health. People who are better educated, have higher incomes, can do a lot of things to alleviate the stress in their lives, including racism. But people who are not as well educated, who are trapped in certain kinds of situations, do not have the same choices to alleviate those problems.
Wow. Our guest for today's program, Texas A&M's Dr. Verna Keith. I definitely want to make sure I tie what you just said. I have concluded in a system of racism, white supremacy, darker people, black people, tend not to have the resources to be able to combat the ill effects of racism and to maintain that high sense of self-esteem and self-efficacy. Not that it's impossible, but that just tends to be the way racism, white supremacy works, to deprive non-white people, especially black people, of those resources. And I also thought it was real important when you talked about believing that you have some sense of control over your life, your environment, even just believing that there are things you can do to improve your situation that has a great effect on that person's sense of self-esteem, self-efficacy. And I wanted to make sure our listeners, there have been a lot of individuals on this program, white and non-white, who have spoken about racism, white supremacy, as though the problem cannot be solved. And I think that is a big problem. I think that right there for non-white people, when you talk about it as though this is just going to exist forever and ever, and our great-great-great-great-grandchildren will be struggling with this, that right there does a lot to adversely impact the mental health of non-white people. I could be incorrect. Do you think that's accurate? If people are thinking about racism as though there's nothing they can do about it, and it's actually just going to go on for eons?
Well, I don't know if it's. Well, we debate this all the time. I teach classes in which have young people, and that's the question they ask me. I'm not sure that's the right question to ask. I think a better question is to ask is how do you develop new techniques and tools to combat it? Mm-hmm. Why would any group give up power voluntarily?
Oh, certainly.
And so I think the questions what I try to challenge my students to do is to find ways that they can work against racism rather than dream about utopia. Because I don't think in a society where we have this kind of history, that it does us very much good to speculate on whether it will end or not end. I think we would be better positioned to come up with strategies that move us closer to that ideal. That's thinking on it. And going back to something you said, my view has always been when I hear about outrageous acts or I read about things that happened in history to people of color, my reaction is not to be overwhelmed or to see it as something that can't be conquered, but my reaction has always been to be angry about it and to then use that anger in constructive ways. Rather than, like my students would tell me, oh, we're tired of hearing about slavery, and I was going like, you shouldn't be tired of hearing about slavery. You should be angry about slavery. So, and that's sort of been how my own personal view of the situation was. I was never embarrassed in class when they talked about slavery. I was angry in class when they talked about slavery.
Wow.
And so that was a motivation for me. I mean, I look back and think about what these people went through and they survived. I admire the slaves tremendously. Because you think about what an individual went through and the fact that they survived, I think that's something people should be proud of in their background.
Wow. Yeah, I agree, and it's when I say that people talk about racism, white supremacy as though this problem cannot be solved. It's not to dream of a perfect world, but the effect that I have seen is that when people think this problem cannot be solved, it tends to erode their willingness or motivation to strategize about how this problem can be solved, how they can work against racism, white supremacy. Why do anything to work against a problem if the problem can't be solved? like
well,
that. It seems like people.
Yeah, I agree with
Seems,
you. I agree.
It seems like a lot of non-white people, that logic kicks in real quick. If the problem can't be solved, then there's no reason for us to do anything to work against it. So that's the danger.
That is a danger. But you know what? No problem can be solved. If that is your attitude about anything, why would you? Okay, we had telephones. Why invent the internet? You could communicate. It cost you too much to call Europe, back in 1960. So did people say, oh, well, we won't look for new ways to make it cheaper and better and more effective?
Totally. I agree wholeheartedly. When you were talking earlier about the stress and being in situations that are stressful and how that can contribute to a lack of mental health for black people, and particularly black females, I wanted to pick a black female who is not in a terrible job situation where she's working for peanuts and doesn't have health care and is not underemployed. First Lady Michelle Obama. Her husband, President Obama, has received a 400% increase in death threats since he's been in office. The various comments that have been made in the paper, the white gentleman who just said he forgot for an hour that he was a black person. Just the cartoon in the paper about this time last year that pictured him as a monkey that was shot and killed in the streets. The people that have had guns at the town hall meetings that he's been at, just a plethora of incidents that seem to be motivated by racism, white supremacy. Do you feel that Michelle Obama is, even First Lady in the White House, do you feel that Michelle Obama as a black female is experiencing a tremendous amount of anxiety corrosive to her mental health due to racism, white supremacy?
Well, let me put it in a larger context. I didn't mean to imply that it's only poor black folks that have stress, right? Middle class African American women. We could write a whole book about the issues that they face with respect to being black women in corporate America or in any higher level job. They sometimes face unique things in that they're the only person of color and they're a woman working in a particular environment. So it's much broader than that. She's going to have anxiety about him. She's going to have anxiety about her children. And you don't escape it. And you can be rich. And there's a certain amount of, you don't escape that system. No matter how many resources you have, there's still a certain amount of stress and anxiety that you will be exposed to. Now, she's got the Secret Service, so that's one helpful kind of thing, which places her in a different position than a poor black woman who's got to worry about whether her kids are going to make it through the neighborhood from school. So depending on where you're situated, there are different pressures that impinge upon you. But no one escapes stress, and no African American or other woman of color escapes it, no matter how well off she is. And of course, she's in a unique position because most of us are not in a situation where we have to worry about our husband's health in the sense of being assassinated every day. But so in some ways she's unique, but in some ways she's not unique.
Wow. I want to check to see if Justice has some more questions for Dr. Verna Keith. But I did want to point out it's not just the stress that she's feeling from what's happening to President Obama. I've seen a lot of reports where people have done things or said things about her.
Oh, yeah. I wondered if you were going to bring that up.
Oh, yeah. I did not want to flip. A lot of non-white females listen to the show. I did not want the email. Yes, I'm very well aware. I have seen the cartoons, and yeah.
The cartoons, and also, you know, she's scrutinized in terms of what she wears, and she shouldn't have had her hair in a ponytail, and all of these kinds of things. I mean, I've always said that whoever runs for president, white, black, Latino, whoever, that is a huge decision that you make because every part of your life is open, you know. And I'm sure that she has felt some stress because early in his campaign, you remember there was criticism about her, and some people argue that this is why she decided that she would focus on sort of family, more traditional kinds of things like growing a garden and that kind of thing. Kind of like the same thing happened to Hillary Clinton, where she was not accepted as a professional in her own right when she was married to the president, that they had to sort of alter their identities to fit what Americans think a first lady should be about. So.
Yes, ma'am. I remember definitely during the campaign, I remember the flack about the dissertation or thesis that she wrote dealing with racism while she was in college. I remember the scrutiny about her saying she can now be proud to be an American. I remember a lot of comments about her being the angry black woman throughout the campaign. Yes, I remember.
And remember they changed her wardrobe and it's just it's you know, well, for a black woman, it's not just racism and white supremacy; it's also gender and sexism. That both are operating, both systems of oppression are operating at the same time in different ways. So, in many ways, what we talk about in our book is that both of those things go on in women's lives. And it's kind of like a double whammy.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I want to check. Justice, if you have questions, go right ahead. Hope we didn't lose him. Are you still with us, Justice?
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, we got you. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a question, Jeff?
Where can non-white people go for help when they experience racism, white supremacy?
Well, I think the first place you want to go is to the people that you love, and we would call that members of your social network. So, for example, your parents, your aunts and uncles in your family. The first thing you want to do is go and talk to them and talk it out with them so they can help you understand, first of all, what happened, and first of all, that what happened was not your fault. And so I think that's the first place to start. For more serious kinds of for people who are having difficulty dealing with it, there are mental health professionals, and increasingly they are becoming aware that people of color need to be able to come in and talk about instances of discrimination against them. So talking to people in your family, but if you're still bothered and it's still weighing on you, also seeking help from counselors and people like that, because there's been a push, at least, to try and get them to understand that a lot of issues that people are seeking treatment for revolve around racism and white supremacy. Does that answer your question?
Yes. How do you work to produce justice?
Well, what I've tried to do is to use my work to provide information that sheds light on this problem. So, for example, my work deals a lot with African American women. And so what I try to do in my work is to untangle the mechanisms that both put people at risk and also help them, with the hopes that this information is going to be used in programs that are targeted towards those people. And to some extent, this doesn't happen as much as I'd like, but I have worked with programs in which, for example, we've taken, or I worked with people who had taken a program into the schools to educate kids about not to use drugs, and they used hip-hop music and things like that to try and talk to kids in their own language about why it's important not to use drugs. So that's one of the things that I do. Another thing that I do is I try and mentor young women of color and try to personally sort of help them talk through bad experiences so that they would not be affected by those bad experiences.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Those are good questions.
Thank you.
Very informed, that Tim. Very informed. I wanted to ask. You have done, at least from what I've seen, have done a lot of focusing on depression, correlation between depression and Black females. What were you seeing, I guess, in terms of symptoms? What were you observing that motivated you to want to study this correlation between depression and racism with Black females?
Well, going back to that continuum that I was telling you about, a lot of African American women fall in the middle of that continuum. They don't have, they're not clinically depressed, but they're sad. You know what I'm saying? We call that depressive symptoms, and that's a lot of what I study. You're not really so depressed that you can't function, like those commercials you see on TV where people can't get up out of the bed and you don't want to laugh. A lot of African American women are just not, they're not depressed exactly, but they're not happy either. And you pick up these, this when you go to places where African American women hang out, like, you know, the hair salon. You know, that's a place where you hear a lot of this. And that's how I got interested in hearing women talk about their lives and understanding that there are days when, although they're not clinically depressed, they have a lot of symptoms. They feel sad. They cry. They feel like, you know, just have that, what we used to call, and I don't know how old you are, but in my generation, we called it the blues.
Okay.
Okay. And so the what I look at are women who are really suffering from the blues. They're not clinically depressed to a point where a doctor would give them medicine like the ones that are advertised on TV, but they're not at optimal mental health. And that feeling the blues can have all kinds of consequences, because a lot of times it may not last long, but they may not feel like cooking for their kids, or they may be moody and, you know, not getting along with people at work. And so that's what I was interested in, because when I went to the hair salon, or I went to, you know, meetings at church, there was a lot of that. And I didn't know what it was until I, you know, went to school and started going, oh, that's what people call the blues. And I learned about how serious it can be, and how it wasn't appreciated as a serious problem. And that's how I got interested in it. Also, I grew up in the South, and a lot of the older women in my community took what was called nerve medicine. Okay, I didn't know what that was until, again, I went to school and found out that, you know, those were sedatives, psychoactive drugs, and that was also part of it. You know, I observed a lot of things when I was growing up that I didn't really understand, and going to university sort of enlightened me about and helped me place some of the things that I had observed in my childhood and also just in my life.
Well, I guess at what point did you come to realize or think that there was a connection between racism and the blues that you were seeing that these black females were experiencing?
I guess, you know, anecdotal stories like, you know, a woman would come in and she'd be relating something that happened to her, like, the common things like being followed around in the store. Mm-hmm. And, you know, being angry about it and not being able to express it, and sort of just kind of going over it. I should have said something. I regret I didn't do anything about it. And then another place that this came from was relationships. Women are often upset about relationships that are not going well. And they talk about those things when they're around a lot of other women. You know, a breakup, a partner who's not acting the way he should, you know, those a woman who is going through a divorce, you know, that's some source of it. Other sources are just not getting along with your family. It can come from a lot of different places.
I know in the book that you co-authored, In and Out of Our Right Mind, you all talk about how black females are less likely to be married than white women. You just talked about, I guess, a source of that sadness, depression, is relationships not going well. Do you think that conflict in black relationships between males and females, do you think a lot of that also is because of racism, white supremacy?
Well, yeah, and it goes back to that those different levels that I was telling you about. We have a society in which African American males don't have the same opportunities to be gainfully employed, yet they have internalized a view of maleness that says, that is the traditional white male view of maleness, that I'm supposed to be head of my family, I'm supposed to take care of my wife and kids, but they are in a system of white supremacy in which the chances of doing that are not always optimal. And so that leads to men thinking that since I can't do that, I am not going to marry and engage and set myself up for failure. Also because employment opportunities is not optimal. many African American men find themselves either underemployed or out of the labor force altogether. There's a difference between employment, unemployment, and being out of the labor force. And out of the labor force means you've given up looking for a job. And when people get to that point, they often turn to the underground economy to try and make a living. And that then puts them at risk for the prison system. When you put all those things together, you put together that with the fact that African American males have a higher mortality rate. There's an imbalance in the number of males per number of females. And that then means that there are fewer opportunities for African American women to marry than there should be when you put all those things together. And it all stems from the opportunity structure, which of course is related to racism and the system that we live in.
Again,
so there are, you've had these conversations probably with your friends. There are just so many more women than there are men, at least among African Americans. Now, this issue varies depending on which group of color that you're talking about. But for African Americans, it's probably worse. And I should point out that one other aspect of the white supremacist system is to try and blame that on the black people themselves rather than the system. And what scholars who work around the world have said, when you get the combinations that African Americans find themselves in with respect to mate availability, when you get that in other places, this imbalance, you get the same kind of family dynamics. So it's not something unique to African American people. It is unique to the system that they find themselves in, the situation that they find themselves in.
Very important. I hope everyone was listening well to that point. I know in addition to a lot of the conflict in relationships, I know that's a big one in terms of producing the blues and depressive symptoms amongst black males and females. Also skin color. That's a big one that comes up repeatedly in and out of our right minds. And I think you've written another book that deals with skin color. Can you talk about how that impacts depression, and particularly going down the continuum in terms of being darker and the ramifications that has for self-esteem and self-efficacy in the system of white supremacy?
Well, historically, and this comes out of slavery, lighter-skinned African Americans were more privileged than darker-skinned African Americans. So in the case of the pre-Civil War days, that meant that people who tended, at least now some people don't agree with this, but some sources say that the slaves who worked in the house were lighter. The free black population was lighter in complexion. And that led to a reverence even within the black population for lighter skin, because these lighter skinned folks had more. They had more materials. In terms of material conditions, they were more likely to be free and so forth. And that got carried into African American culture, so that lightness is more highly valued, and we attach all kinds of other attributes to it. Like, we think people are more intelligent if they're lighter. We think that they are more fun, and a whole bunch of other things. Well, as it works out in relationships, lighter African American women are considered more attractive than the darker women. And so, given that how women feel about themselves is linked to how attractive they feel to the opposite sex, it has implications for mental health and feelings of self-esteem. Now, there are caveats. Darker women who have achieved higher education are less likely to be impacted by colorism. And so there are exceptions where, it doesn't hold. And I might also add that some of the data, at least, shows that we may be working ourselves out of some of these things. It used to be the case that lighter people were more likely to get hired, and some research suggests that that might be dissipating. However, the area where it still remains a strong influence is in marriage and partnership and mate selection. So, as one of my colleagues has written about, having lighter skin in the marriage market is a form of capital. It is something you can trade for a more higher status mate.
Wow. In your book, you talked about how for black females, the skin complexion issue, it sets in very early, that amongst very young kids, you can see these effects where darker children, darker black females tend to have more of these issues around self-esteem as opposed to lighter females at a very young age. Can you share that information with our listeners?
Yeah, if you think about when young women begin to think about young men around puberty, and they start to think about wanting boyfriends and wanting to date and these kinds of things, this is also a time where all kids go through sort of a self-doubt. Are my clothes right? Is my hair okay? But African American women, in addition to all those things, have this whole skin color going on of wondering if they are attractive enough, and they also have body image things, going on also. And so what all the research shows is that these issues come into play right about the time that they're beginning to think about boys. And darker skinned girls have more probably self-doubt at this point, because they're aware of who the boys are calling pretty. They're aware of conversations about who's got good hair, whose lips are thick, and it has an effect on their self-esteem. Now, I should put in context that African American kids, regardless of everything that they face, tend to have, on average, pretty high self-esteem. But there are some variations, and the differences do revolve around things like skin color and whether you're overweight or underweight, and so forth. So yeah, it does have an impact on them. It starts very early, and some of the issues about body size and things like that can even start before puberty. So
I know you did point out, I thought this was key, you did point out that even though amongst black people we have a lot of issues around skin color and being lighter complexion or darker complexion, that in regards to mistreatment, white people who practice racism seem to be equal opportunity oppressors, in that they mistreat lighter skinned black people and darker skinned black people. That you said in the research in the book, it doesn't seem that lighter skinned black people get off. They still experience quite a bit of racism. It's not like they're the darlings for white people, and I thought that was real important to make sure listeners did hear that.
It was. Yeah, we don't want to argue that light-skinned people don't experience racism, at all. And in that particular piece, we didn't find any differences. We were talking about a particular context, and that was like grade school, how people were treated in their grade schools. So, no, we never wanted to make the argument that just because you're light-skinned, you get a bye. You don't. You can see that with President Obama, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's really interesting. You bring up skin color. There's a study that's going to be published pretty soon that suggests that the people who voted for Obama saw him as lighter than the people who didn't. Yeah, I saw an advanced notice of it, and I can't even remember which journal it's going to come out in. But, they found that the people who voted against him just, sort of, they did want to, it almost sounded from the little excerpt I read that people did one of those internal kind of things where, you remember the O.J. Simpson Time magazine cover where they darkened him?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's almost as if what they're finding is that the people who voted against him sort of in their mind saw him as darker,
Very interesting. So, I remember that.
Yeah, you remember, it was a big controversy. Like, they kind of changed his complexion on that magazine cover. So, it doesn't mean that you get I always put that in everything that I write about colorism and complexion, that we're not saying that lighter-skinned people are not the victims of racism. We're saying that historically there have been variations in how blackness is experienced. Okay? And, within our own communities, I used to look at my parents' college, yearbooks.
Yes, ma'am.
And if you went back and looked at them, they were, all the the beauty queens were always light-skinned and had, as they say, good hair. So think about the message, think about the messages to young girls who don't have those characteristics. And you're saying to them, you're not as desirable. It doesn't say that you're not desirable. It says you're not as desirable.
Very interesting. I guess for today's program, again, Dr. Verna Keith. I'm going to see if Justice has some questions before I hop forward. Justice, if you have questions, go right ahead.
What do you do when you are around white people who practice racism, white supremacy?
Well, that's a tough question. If it is an overt act where it's clearly out of bounds, insulting, offensive, in many cases I will point that out and explain why that's offensive. Often is the case for African Americans and other people of color is that it is borderline and you're not sure if the motivation is racism or ignorance. And so you have to do a little calculation in your brain to determine what you're going to do. And so depending on what I decide, that determines what I do. Sometimes I say things and point it out, and sometimes I just let it go. It depends on my assessment of the situation. I think for your own mental health, you cannot challenge every act of racism because they are too numerous. I think there are some things that you have to, you have to, as they say, choose your battles. And so I choose my battles. I choose what I'm going to respond to and what I'm not going to respond to.
What suggestions can you offer to help eliminate racism, white supremacy?
Well, as I said before, I think every person has to find a way to work against it. Some people join organizations. Some people work through their, schools and churches and community organizations. My own personal approach to this has been to, because I'm on a university campus, try and work with students and mentor them and help them deal with instances where they've been discriminated against, and help them talk it through and figure out ways to deal with it, particularly if it's coming from a faculty member. I help them figure out ways to either informally deal with the issue or, depending on what it is, to go through university channels. But there are, you're 10 years old, and what I would hope is that you will grow up, go to college, and that you will write about these issues and also work through organizations on projects that are aimed at this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Context of white supremacy, Justice, Gus T Renegade, and our guest, Dr. Verna Keith. I also want to make sure we get a few calls before the program wraps up. Anybody who would like to call in to ask questions, call-in number is 347-215-6071. In your book, you talk about the importance of having a social network, having organizations, whether it's church or different social groups that you go to, that this helps mediate depression, having helpful relationships with your family and friends, that this can help. But you also talked about it can be an adverse factor as well if these relationships are not healthful. And just my own thoughts, in a system of racism, white supremacy, if you're a non-white person and you're around a lot of other people who are experiencing racism and being mistreated, they also might be upset that could contribute to it, just being around a lot of other non-white people who could be in a similar situation where they're also unhappy. Do you think that plays into the effects that you're seeing in terms of depressive symptoms amongst black females, black people in general?
Well, I think it works differently for different people. Some people find it helpful to be around folks with similar experiences and to sit around and to vent and to collectively strategize about what can be done, or just to have someone to recognize the legitimacy of their complaint. For other people, it's not helpful. It drags them down into a deeper level and they experience more symptoms. So I think part of it depends on the person and their individual network and how they respond to that support network. I don't think you can generalize. Now, we do know that, generally speaking, having a supportive network helps you work through problems. The exception to that is when your network is the source of the problem. And that can be, one of the chapters that we explored in that book was where we looked at where social support becomes problematic, Yeah. Because, all the research has shown us that generally, on the whole, having support from friends, from spouses, from extended family, help people manage racism and other problems. But the exception to that is when the people in your network are making so many demands on you that it becomes a source of problem in and of itself. And we wanted to talk about that particularly as it applied to African American women because they are often the leader of the family. They're often the person who hears all the problems of everybody else. They're often the person who has to manage the family issues when other people are fighting and so forth. And so sometimes the woman is giving so much of herself to the network that it's becoming having a negative impact on her instead of a helpful impact. And so that was one of the things that we wanted to get out there. So I think if the women didn't sit around in the beauty shop talking about their problems, they'd be less depressed. Generally, I think not. But there could be exceptional women where this is worse than not being in the hair salon talking about their problem.
Wow. Yeah, I was more so thinking the chapter, I think we're referencing the same one, where you talked about if you are a black female and the support system is kind of exacting a toll on you, where you're around a lot of other black people. It could be even family members who are also experiencing racism, and you've got to try and deal with their demands and how they're being mistreated. It could be a spouse, particularly we already talked about black males and problems that they're facing. That could be exacting a toll.
Right.
I think you talked in your book about how black females tend to be more involved in the church. That could be exacting a toll. I could really see where that could become a lot of burdens in having to deal with so many other people who are experiencing a lot of the same problems because of racism and other issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Expected to be nurturing. If you're, one of the chapters in the book, and I should say to people that there were multiple authors involved in this. But one of the chapters in the book deals with relationships and deals with the fact that women often put aside their experiences of racism in order to help their husbands deal with theirs. They put their issues on a back burner because the husband is experiencing, problems, issues. And so in supporting him, or even, in supporting him, women often just sort of bury their problem. And they fester. I'm trying to think of there's an article that's out there that talks about how a lot of African American women don't acknowledge depression because there is a stigma that's linked to it. And so a lot of women go untreated because in the African American community, you're supposed to pray yourself out of problems.
Yes, ma'am.
You can't, and so sometimes they're depressed and there's no name to link it to because they've been taught all their lives that if you have an issue, you just pray about it and it'll get better. Sometimes it doesn't get better. I think that's important to also note that there's a lot of stigma and misinformation about mental health issues in communities of color, and it works. In some cases, it works against us because it makes people feel alone, that there isn't anybody to turn to. Because I'm not supposed to feel this way. I'm supposed to be a strong black woman.
Wow. Do you see that just your observations, have you seen where that's a big issue in terms of denial about these mental health issues amongst Black?
And denial comes from is societal based, or community based, in the sense that, again, our cultural norms have been that we're supposed to work ourselves out of these problems. There's been some research on this notion of the strong Black woman and how it is both a positive and a negative. A strong Black woman, that is a really important image, and buying into that image can see you through a lot of difficulties. But it can also have the opposite effect of not allowing you to recognize that you need help. And we can generalize this to other women of color, but everybody's heard about the strong Black woman kind of image. And so it functions to sustain us, but it also can function to undercut our abilities to seek help when we need it. Because at some point, if you're in an environment which you can't control, which as much as you want to be efficacious and control your environment, it's too overwhelming. There are too many problems. There are too many instances of discrimination. At that point, you need to be able to reach out to people. And to the extent that you can do that, that's good. But if you're carrying around this image that if I let my guard down, it means I'm not strong, it can also be detrimental.
Wow. Like I said, I wanted to make sure we get some callers, but excellent. I'm glad we got that in. Let's see, 253. Someone called in at 253, and you have a hand up. If you have a question for Dr. Verna Keith, you are live on the air. Go right ahead.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. Earlier in the program, Doctor, you mentioned something about, I didn't quite catch the name, but you mentioned it was a medication that people in the South used to take some time ago or whatnot. Can you possibly give me the name or where to find that information and maybe talk a little more about that?
I don't know what the particular drugs were, but they would be what we would call antidepressants today, except back then, because you couldn't acknowledge that you had a mental health issue, they just called it nerve medicine.
I'm sorry, can you spell that first word? No.
N-E-R, like bad nerves, nerve.
Oh,
N-E-R-V-E.
Nerve, okay.
Nerve medicine. And what those particular drugs were, I'm not sure, because this was when I was like a really young girl, and I didn't connect it until I got older. So I don't know what the specific drugs were, but they were antidepressants, pretty much.
Thank you.
Thank you for calling in. Someone called in. Your line is showing up all ones, 111. If you have a hand question for Dr. Keith, we got you. Go right ahead.
Greetings, Renegade, Justice, and your guest, Dr. Keith.
Hello.
Greetings. Thank you for calling in consistently.
Hello.
Greetings to everyone. My question for you, Dr. Keith, is it's a maybe three-part question. First of all, in your experience and observation, have you met anyone who hasn't gotten angry in any way whatsoever about racism, white supremacy? The second part of the question is, if you have, is that any indication as to how mentally healthy they are or are not? And the third part of the question is, can you, in your experience and observation, give us your purpose for anger?
Okay. Have I ever met anyone who wasn't had not experienced anger about racism and white supremacy, I can say that I have not, okay? What I have met and what I have experienced are people who went through a stage where they transitioned into an internalization of the assumptions of white supremacy.
Dr. Keith, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Can you explain what that means?
Early in the show, we talked about different levels of racism, and one of the levels is what's called internalization. It's when a member of a minority group actually begins to believe the assumptions about inferiority that emanate from white supremacy. And I have met people who have internalized those assumptions, whereby they think they're inferior to whites. So I have had that experience. Now, what I didn't understand is when you asked me about the purpose of anger, are you talking about the purpose of my anger or the purpose of anger among people of color in general?
Yes, in general.
I think anger makes you active. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of anger where you just walk up and start hitting people and acting out, but I think a certain level of anger is healthy in that it helps you mobilize. Okay, now I'm not talking about anger to a point where it encompasses your life and you're just an angry person and you can't get along with any of that. I'm talking about a level of anger where it makes you want to do something about the issue. And so that's my definition of being angry.
So if you don't have that healthy level, can I say, of anger, then would that be some indication as to how, what you say on that continuum of mental health, whether you're going towards the healthy end or the not healthy end?
I don't know if you can say that, because I guess a person who's not angry, you could argue, is not going to be upset by racism. I think most African Americans are upset by it, and that failure to deal with it in some way will move them towards the not healthy end of the continuum. But theoretically, I guess you could be not angry and perfectly well. I just don't think it occurs often in reality. What about you? Do you think that actually happens in real life?
Well, I don't know. You see what I'm not sure that I'm quite with you all the way, but if I understand what I think you're saying, what I'm getting at is, say, a person is fired as a result of white supremacy from their job.
Okay.
And they say, oh, well, I knew something like this was going to happen. I mean, simply because the system exists. Mm-hmm. And then they say, and I have no anger whatsoever about it. And situations like those, or you know the system exists, so you have a family member who is dragged from the back of a truck by some racist white supremacist, and you say, well, living where we live and, you know, all the other variables, and then you say, so I suspected this would happen, so I'm not angry about it. This is what I'm getting at.
Okay, well, I think I would question whether the person is just denying that level of anger.
Ah, interesting.
That's what I would question. That's a coping mechanism of some sort. But you know, I guess theoretically, I guess you could have an individual like that. But I would be more inclined to think that person is sort of suppressing their anger or upset of being upset.
And so that's why I asked what you would say is the purpose of anger, I guess more, and to be a little bit more specific, in a healthy manner.
Yeah. I was thinking more about anger at what happens to the group, you know. Now, and I see what you're saying. You're talking about the emotion of a personal experience of anger, right?
Yes, and then also, you know, because as you speak, it raises so many questions because I'm saying, well, then would the group and the individual also have to agree on the purpose of the anger in terms of it being healthy or not?
Well, I think if the anger motivates you to, engage in action that satisfies or at least dissipates the anger, then it's healthy. Teach you to do things to engage in actions that's not alleviating it, then I would say it's unhealthy.
Okay.
To simplify it. Because I guess there are different ways that anger could be played out. You could, like I say, be angry and go and do something very destructive either to yourself or to others, or you could be angry and join the NAACP or, you know, the Urban League or some organization that is community-centered and focused on justice. And if it's not clear-cut, maybe hitting somebody made you feel better, and I guess that could be healthy on one level, although you might end up in jail, and I would say it's probably not going to be healthy in the long run. I don't know if you can slice it that clear-cut. I think it's much more complex than that. So your question is a good one.
Well, thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Let's see. Someone else called in at 111. Other person that called in at 111, do you have a question?
Yes. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Dr. Keith, have you ever read the book, The Myth of the Negro Past?
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like probably before you were born. So what's the point you want to make about it? Refresh me.
Oh, well, they just had a documentary about it on PBS Independent Lens.
Oh, I missed it.
Yeah, and it's not really the question I wanted to ask, but in that documentary, this guy, Melvin Hertzkovitz, he was like the Elvis Presley of anthropology, and he studied African culture, and he tied in the African culture to the African American culture, and it was deep because he didn't want anything political to come out of it, and his views were kind of very anti change as far as the situations that blacks were in. And it was just very interesting. And the only reason I thought about it is because when you were talking about, you know, the peer-reviewed journal and all of that, he and W.E.B. Du Bois, they were in conflict because, you know, he was submitting his thoughts to this guy, Hertzkovitz, and Hertzkovitz was behind Du Bois' back, undermining the encyclopedia that Du Bois was trying to start. The African, it was deep. So, you know, when Gus was talking about how when you do a study or you have your study and you have to submit it, and you were saying that usually the people you have to submit it to are white people, and you know they can basically get it, whether you get published or not kind of depends on them. But anyway, that story it goes into that scenario pretty well.
Yeah, I would say this. One of the things that he did, though, which served African Americans despite what differences he might have had with Du Bois, was that the argument had been that African American culture did not survive slavery, that it was not, there were no African survivals.
Right.
There's no links. And he did make an argument, which then led younger scholars to investigate this and make a case that there was still a link between African American culture and African culture. So that's one positive thing that he did. But you're right. Yeah, we do submit our work to two journals in which the vast majority of people that are reviewing them are white. But you also have to understand that a lot of, at least in my field, a lot of the critical race theorists are white. A lot of the people writing about white supremacy and critiquing it are also white. So we can't indict the white scholars, cast a blanket over all of them, because some of the best work in the area has been done, some of the good work in the area has been done by white scholars also. So those two things are operating at the same time.
We've had quite a few of those white scholars come through here on the cows. Dr. Nancy Krieger, I saw you cited her. She has been here. Quite a few other white people. I am highly suspicious of them, and I think their conduct on this program, I think, has generated a lot more suspicion just based on things that they have said and, answers that they've given to questions or answers that they have not given to questions. I am highly suspicious of them. Nancy Krieger included. She was with us.
What was it been like that she said? I'm just curious. Area,
Number one, she agreed at the beginning of the program that very often in discussions of racism, when people, the same thing that you said, when people come from the academy, they do not disseminate information in a way that everyone can easily understand what's being said, and she agreed that she would make an effort to not do that, and she did not. In my view, she did not give out information in a manner that the non-white people who are listening, who need the most help, could easily grasp what was being said. I would say that's number one. Number two, I had to work a little too hard to get information in terms of, I remember she was using the term racial discrimination, and I don't use that term, it's racism. Racism and or white supremacy, and I generally try to stick with white supremacy.
Yeah, notice.
And she was saying racial discrimination, and I said, well, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say that? And she said a non-white person being mistreated in some manner, but she described it in a way that was very abstract, so it wasn't connected to a perpetrator. And after some questioning, she finally got down to, yes, there would have to be somebody doing this if it's happening to a non-white person. Someone ultimately would have to be responsible for this. So, yes, and she said that would be racism. Yes. And it took about 5 minutes to get to this. When I have to do that with someone who's been doing research at Harvard University over 20 years, and I have to spend 5 minutes to get them to be truthful about the fact that, yes, racial discrimination is someone who is white mistreating someone because they're not white, that raises my level of suspicion about this person, particularly if it's a white person.
Okay, good. I'm not white, so I'm gonna go back to what I was saying at the beginning, and I think one reason why she may have responded this way, not that I know her or have any stake in defending her, but it goes back to that thing about the 3 levels of racism. There's the institutional. There's the interpersonal, which is what you're defining, and the internalized racism. And so if we only confine it to a white person doing something to a black person or other non-white person, then we miss a bunch of stuff, like what I was saying about residential segregation. Okay? So as social scientists, we see discrimination and racism as encompassing all of those levels and all of them being bad. And we try not to always confine it to this idea of a person doing something to you. Because you can be discriminated against by the fact that you live in a certain neighborhood and they decided to build a clinic on the other side of town that you can't get to. And so that's not the same as a person, I don't know, walking up to you and saying something bad, or you going into a restaurant and they put you by the kitchen. That's different. And we see it as different. So that's all I will say on that. At any rate, one of my colleagues is have you ever heard of Joe Fagan?
Oh, Joe Fagan was supposed to be on the show last summer. We're trying to reschedule. I hope to get him on the show, and I will tell Joe Fagan when he comes through, I'm highly suspicious of his work.
Okay.
Yeah, he's at Texas A&M too, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm suspicious of him. Tim Wise was here last week. I'm suspicious of him. There's no white person that would be above suspicion as long as racism, white supremacy exists. And the vast majority of white people who have been on this program have agreed that is the logical position to take as long as white supremacy exists.
Okay.
I did want to point out, though, you said if they build a clinic that you don't have access to, you said they. Someone is responsible for that happening.
Okay, but it could be the city, and the city council could be half black. Okay, someone is responsible. It does get that. But what happens when you only put it in individual terms, it allows whites in particular who are never around black people to say they're not racist. And to then argue that racism doesn't exist because you don't have these individual kinds of things. And they tend to skip the fact that the city council decided to put a clinic somewhere else that was not easily reachable by people of color and not define that as racism. And so when you read public opinion polls and you talk to the scholars who do research on racial attitudes, there's a large number of whites in the United States who think that racism is over because you don't have the kind of racism that existed back in the 60s where people were overtly calling folks names and not letting them sit at the counter and that kind of thing. And that's why I always like to remind folks that there are different types of racism because that is a problem in the United States.
I didn't want to monopolize all the time because somebody else did call in. Call in 404. 404, are you there with the question for Dr. Keith?
Oh, I didn't have any questions. Thanks.
Oh.
I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. Thank you for listening. Thank you. Before I didn't want to miss out suggestions, real important suggestions. Do you have suggestions for things black females especially can do to strengthen, improve their self-esteem, to help deal with depression that they might be experiencing? Any suggestions at all?
Well, I guess there are two things. I think you have to find some kind of supportive network, and that can take different forms for different people. For some people, it's volunteering in, like I said, community organizations. And they may not necessarily be community organizations that are fighting racism and injustice. But, being involved in organizations that give you a support network, that give you, that provide you with opportunities to find fulfillment is one thing. Another suggestion is the church is still a place where women draw strength from. And we have all of these, we have all of this information that says that being involved in the church activities, but also prayer and other spiritual activities assist people in dealing with racism and other stressful conditions. And the other thing that I would suggest is, but if you find yourself overwhelmed, seek professional help. Again, there's a stigma now, has been a stigma in our communities about you should be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You should be able to be strong and work yourself through a period of sadness. And when it gets to a certain point where you really are getting close to not being able to function, you should seek professional help. And that is often, it starts with a visit to your primary care physician, your regular doctor, who can then recommend you to a counselor. So those would be the kinds of things that that I would suggest to women. Every place that I've worked, we've had a women's group. At every university that I've been at, we've had a little group of women who get together. Sometimes it's to go to a movie. Sometimes it's to go see a play. Sometimes it's just to have dinner, and sometimes it's just to be at somebody's house. And you know, you get together and you talk about stuff and you know, share ideas, things.
My microphone here. I'm not picking up anything through my headset here. My sound is not cooperating with me. How about that? I still am not hearing anything. Wow, I'm still not picking up anything. My sound is not cooperating at all. How about that?
You can't hear me?
Okay, gotcha. There we go.
You hear me?
Technical avoided. All right, thank you. Yes, I can hear you now. I definitely appreciated those suggestions, because I did not want to just talk about the difficulties and everything without having some recommendations for things that non-white people, especially black females, can do to bolster self-esteem under the conditions of racism, white supremacy. I guess could you tell us, because I did see the other book that you co-authored, Skin Deep. I'm looking at it right now. Full title, anyone who is listening in who wants to check it out: Skin Deep: How Race and Complexion Matter in the Colorblind Era. Could you, I guess, before you go, could you give us maybe 30 seconds on what that book is about and why we should check that one out too?
Well, the colorblind idea is the notion that we live in a post-racial society, and that rather than focusing on our differences, that we should just be colorblind and ignore color, which of course is not advantageous to people of color, because those color still informs their life. So this book was about various ways of tackling that issue, from looking at complexion to looking at things like what is going to happen as more and more Latino groups come to the United States. Where are they going to fall on the racial hierarchy? Because we don't think we live in a colorblind society. We think color is really still a part of how the U.S. is organized. And that's kind of what that book was about, and talked about different ideas about that.
Okay. Outstanding. I will definitely recommend it. I almost switched and looked at that one instead of In and Out of Our Right Minds for this program. But yeah, I will definitely pick it up. What you just said sounds interesting. And thank you for taking time out of your weekend to come and share great information with us. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned a lot. I wish you the best at Texas A&M, and will keep my eyes peeled for more information coming out about racism, white supremacy, and the work that you do.
Okay. Well, don't talk about me on your next show like you did these other people.
Oh, I only talk about the white people. Only talk about the white people, and you can let Joe Fegan know. I will be getting in touch with him.
I will.
Looking forward to chatting.
Okay, well, it was nice meeting you, and it was nice meeting Justice, and she's a smart little young woman.
She is.
Hello, and thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keith.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Again, Dr. Verna Keith, Texas A&M co-author of In and Out of Our Right Minds. We'll take a quick commercial break. I want to point out all the people that I said something about on today's show. White people. We're taking a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Context of white supremacy.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Peace, family. This is your brother, Hollop, a.k.a. Mr. Holipsis, a.k.a. the Buzz Killer. Tune in to Holipsism's Haven every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we discuss the social, economic, and political issues of the day with a common-sense approach, an African-centered perspective, and a universal sensibility. Call-in number 347-843-4874. That's 347-843-4874. To check out related YouTube videos, blogs, and show archives, visit www.holipsism.com. That's www.holipsism.com. I'm making it hard to get your Negro on. Hotep, Black Power.
There's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
This is Justice. I just wanted to go get my email address. It's justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com. You seem to be having technical difficulties. Are there any callers on the line?
I'm here, Justice. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you think about the show?
I thought it was an excellent show. Very constructive show. How about you?
Hang on, I'm going to try to get Gus on the line.
Okay.
Well, we're going to wrap up the program.
Okay, Justice.
Looks like that Gus can't get back on, so thanks
Okay,
everybody
well,
for calling in.
Thank you. Thank you for the show. It was an excellent show.
You're welcome. Okay, signing off.